All right, on today's episode, we're talking podcasts, and I've got a good friend of mine coming on, and we're going to talk about everything you need to know to launch a podcast, to get it ranked, and how to use it as a profitable networking tool for partnership marketing managers and people that you're looking to connect with on a deeper level. I've got on my friend Luis Diaz, and he is the founder and CEO of Top 10 Podcasts, and he is a production and done-for-you podcast chart ranking agency. And this isn't done-for-you service has launched over 300 podcasts with over 17 million downloads and $1.6 million in traceable revenue back to his clients and their pockets. So I'm going to get him to open up about every strategy that he has on how to get ranked, including how he's going to rank my podcast through working together. Now, before we get into the episode, please, as always, press the like button, subscribe, share, comment, let me know what you like, what you didn't, and then share with one other person you think that could benefit from this podcast. It helps get the word out, and I will always be very grateful for your help. Now, let's get into today's episode. All right, Luis Diaz, man, welcome to the PartnerUp Profits podcast. I'm excited for you to be here on the show and share everything you know about podcasts with everyone listening today, so welcome.
Dude, thank you so much for having me here, Joey. Super pumped. I'm an open book, so we can go as deep, as wide, as far as we want to go. So I'm ready to rock.
Good. I'm excited about that. And I'm a little bit nervous because of the fact you've had so many podcast experiences, whether, your own podcast or just dealing with other people who's got these top 10 podcasts. So hopefully we do it justice today. Before we get started, though, I always like to ask somebody, what's something interesting about you that no one else might not know?
Oh, so that's a great one. So very few people know this, but my dad played for the Houston Astros in the 70s. And I grew up, first part of my life thinking I was going to play in the Major League Baseball, in the MLB. And then that slowly faded. But yeah, that's a very small fact many people do not know about me.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't even know that. Are you like a guy who loves speed too? I think I remember like you saying something along the profiles that you're like, are you like a speed car racer guy or?
No, definitely have my share of speeding tickets, but definitely not a speed car guy. Funny enough, I used to live near Homestead in Miami, which is an amazing racetrack, but that might have been a different guess other than me.
Okay, I got you. So quick backstory is like Luis and I have known of each other for a while. We've run in the same circles, same networking connections, and just never had a chance to really work together directly on any kind of new projects. Then lo and behold, I decided to release a podcast, and here we are kind of working together on a ranking system. And I'm excited to be working with you. Your wealth of knowledge. I took the course that you'd given me, and it's amazing too. So I really want to kind of go deep on a lot of areas of the podcast world and some selfish questions that I have, as well as things I think could benefit everyone here. So today's episode, I really want to focus on the future of podcasting, everything from also like anything you know about ads, but then specifically how to get ranked. Okay, that's a big one, and especially as podcasts continue to grow here. How to find profitable guests, and then one thing, and we'll get into this because this is my like sneaky tactic that I used as why I started a podcast. But how can be used and leveraged as a partnership and a networking tool beyond just having a podcast? Is who you'll be able to connect with on a platform like this. And you're the man when it comes to the rankings. So how did you get into all the ranking systems? And like, was this something you kind of intended for?
No, honestly, it was by good fortune that early on in my career as a podcaster, I was in the right circles. I was in kind of with guys like you and masterminds. And I quickly, when I started my podcast, I tested a lot of stuff. I failed at a lot of stuff, and I learned early on what content worked and what didn't. So I was able to grow my early podcast, which is called Ask the Ab Guy. So you can tell I wasn't then doing the same thing I was now. It was about 20 pounds ago. I'll say you're teaching guys how to get six-pack abs. And that podcast grew from like 0 downloads to like 19 or $20,000 a month, which was at the time big for me. Was making money with the show, and I started working with other professional bodybuilders, fitness professionals, fitness experts, guys with big YouTube followings, and working with them behind the scenes to launch their podcasts. And through that, I learned what the algorithm is looking for, specifically when it comes to the Apple podcast rankings or Apple charts, what they're looking for, what makes it go up, what makes it go down. I don't think I would have that knowledge if I worked with smaller clients at my onset when I first started. So it was really by luck and just being able to be around the right people that I was able to see behind the scenes what was going on with their numbers, what was affecting the rankings, what didn't, and just testing a bunch of stuff. And when you work with clients like that, you have a faster feedback loop to test what works when it comes from like running promotions on emails or certain types of content that works or doesn't work, because they have bigger followings, and you can just see the comments and the good or bad, stuff come much faster than if you had smaller channels or smaller shows. So yeah, I got into that part of it. And then funny enough, I was doing all this podcasting stuff, helping people launch and grow and helping them rank all the time for a couple of years. And then my new business partner, or not so new anymore, Rudy, kind of like had a meeting with me, and he was like, what's the number one thing that you can, help people do? What's like the biggest, sexiest or flashiest thing? And I'm like, it's probably helping people rank. And we started to really focus on, after that was like 2021, we started to help people and focus on just the ranking, which we still do everything, but I think a lot of people now, that's a hard thing to achieve. So the last 2 years of my life has been just trying to figure out how to consistently and very in a like very predictable manner get people ranked. So spent a lot of money and time and tests on that, and yeah, that's kind of been my last 18 months to 2 years of just kind of figure this out.
So, I mean, and that's kind of like fairly still recent, but it sounds like you dialed it in a long time ago. Now you've just owned in and niched down, which I love. When it comes to like any brand building stuff or just personalization of things, it's really important to understand what's the big thing you can deliver, which it sounds like you've obviously found a clientele for. Yeah, it's interesting, the fitness background, because I came up with like guys like Craig Ballantyne, Vince Del Monte, and all these guys. We were all doing fitness products back in the day. And then, of course, I abandoned the same dream of having a six-pack for the rest of my life because I love food.
Right.
So what were some of like the biggest mistakes that you made or clients made that we could like give a little bit of a cheat sheet as to what not to do when starting this podcast journey?
Yeah, I think like anything in business, assumptions are dangerous. So a lot of people with podcasting make the assumption that if I have big guests on, I will then become big, or I will be, by association, I will grow, which is not necessarily true. So assumption, that's one big assumption, I think, expecting if I get Ed Milet on, then obviously I'm going to blow up overnight, or I'm going to have a windfall of traffic and people buying or reaching out to me to work with me. Very, very untrue. So I think early on, that was one of the things I saw people make and clients make, and I wasn't smart enough at the time to warn them and say, well, no, it doesn't really work like that. You do have the off cases where it's like, yeah, you maybe get a client because you interviewed somebody who was really famous and somebody found your stuff. It happens, but it's not a surefire thing, right? It's not consistent. So I think that is definitely one. Another one would be trying to model somebody who's already a market leader. For example, people trying to market or model like a Tim Ferriss or a Joe Rogan. It's very difficult because those guys have built such massive brands. You can't really compete with those guys. They have ownership in that marketplace where it's like a 2 to 3 hour conversation, and they can get the number one neuroscientist in the world on their show. You probably can't. So I think trying to model people who just have a different level of money or finances as well as connections is really, really hard. And it's a mistake I think I've seen people make a lot, and made myself with other clients' shows, right? Like we're trying to model the wrong people and it just didn't work out. So I've learned from my own mistakes too. I'd say those are two big ones. Just assuming, it comes back to assumptions, like assuming that if I do X, Y, and Z, this is going to happen, where there's no actual evidence to prove otherwise, or to prove that's actually happened or going to happen. So I think those are two big ones. There's a ton of little ad tests that I've done on different platforms that have gotten the results, but then didn't really get the real results you wanted, which was like actual people hitting you up and downloading your stuff. Like they'll get the downloads, but they won't get like the traction that you're looking from a business perspective.
Yeah. That's really powerful, because I analyze a lot of deals when it comes to content creators and influencers. And what you're mentioning right now is the engagement factor. Somebody might get the downloads and the listens, but they might not have influence over endorsements or product recommendations, things like that. And something else you mentioned too that I think it is really important is, shooting for the stars when it comes to at least starting the podcast. I heard something, and I think you're resonating with that, is the same messaging that I heard was you want people that are going to promote your podcast more so than maybe even you're going to promote it by them being on it. So it's like, it's kind of judging who you're bringing on the podcast to a point where maybe the Ed Milets and those people might come one day. Again, those are big stars in terms of the podcast world here. but like, yeah, adjusting your expectations. And, I'd love to know a little bit more about okay, so let's talk about the ranking, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it ties back into what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
What's your strategy with building a top 10 ranking for someone as a client? If they're doing their own client bookings, but what's your recommendation to them? Like, how are you targeting people on how to bring them to your show or to go on other shows, and what's your prospecting look like there?
So to bring big name guests onto their shows when we're trying to rank a podcast, or trying to bring listeners?
Just in general, like when you're trying to rank someone's podcast in the beginning, what's your guest strategy approach for both external and bringing people onto the show?
Okay. So the fun thing with ranking a podcast, when you have a ranked show, you can reach higher and get better guests. Again, that doesn't mean they're going to promote it or anything, but it is going to help elevate the status. And it could create a flywheel effect where you can get bigger and better guests. And over time, yes, I think that can happen. The assumption I've seen in the past, people think it happens like you do it once and it's like a set it and forget it kind of thing. Like, for example, I get Ed Milet on. Everything else for me is gravy there after that. Doesn't happen. So the approach when booking podcast guests, because that's what I'm assuming, that's what my thought is on the question. And I can pivot this to listeners in a second if we want. My approach to that is looking at kind of taking a step back and looking at what's the overall goal of the podcast. For example, we mentioned like partnerships before. And that could be a very strong goal as to why someone's launching a podcast is like, I want to build a lot of profitable relationships in a specific vertical. If that's the goal, I have to reverse engineer and think about, well, what's in it for them besides just a podcast interview? Because nine times out of 10, these guys have been on a podcast interview before. How can I make this podcast interview valuable enough for them to give me an hour of their time? And I want to make sure that's the question you're asking around booking guests. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or is it?
No, it is. And I think we can circle back to it in terms of, how to actually get a hold of these guests and what's the effective approach. You have a lot of systems and SOPs in your vault that you kind of shared with me, because I'm a client of yours now, because I believe in it, and that's why I'm having you on the podcast. But I'll put a pin in that one here. I want to something you just mentioned, which was the primary thing why I was like starting the podcast from the beginning. Did I want to start a podcast and make a bunch of money? Yeah, why not? Who knows? Like, whatever happens, happens. This is more of a passion project that I want to establish myself as a couple of things. One, a thought leader. I don't necessarily want to be the leader, but I want to be a thought leader bringing together a community of connectors and people of like-minded marketing skills and marketing backgrounds, etc. Second thing, though, is I want to be able to connect with people on a deeper level. You only get that if you're actually being able to have a conversation that's not in a business setting necessarily. And like, we're going to get into some personal questions later. So I think that from a partnership perspective, how effective have you seen this being leveraged by people in positions where they're just trying to connect with people? They're trying to like reach bigger networks. Have you seen some of your clients kind of take that same route and be successful with it?
Oh yeah. I think it comes down to the type of questions that you ask the guests that unlock different doors and different level or layers of their personality and who they are as a person. So if you ask questions that will maybe tap into their philanthropic interests or their personal or family interests with an interview show, you can get into different layers of who they are, which can open up opportunities for you to then, use to help or become a better connection for them. So I think Steve Sims talks about this when, about like, there's a couple times he's gotten guests or his clients on big stages, or he's gotten them backstage passes to things because he knew the philanthropic interests of XYZ big influencer, and he was able to really play into that. So one of the things I like to do on my podcast, or anyone I'm trying to connect with for that matter, I've used it in like social media as well, is I'll figure out if they're a sports fan, because I'm a New York Giants fan. So case in point, I had a friend who I got on his podcast literally by sending him a New York Giants hat. Because I did some research and I was kind of poking around his social. You can do this in a podcast context as well. You just like find out like what sports team they like, and then I sent him the hat of their biggest rivalry, which was my team, and he sent me like a Cowboys hat, which is funny, but it created a relationship and a bond which we would have never had I just like looked at like just saw him as a a live streaming expert. Like there's no way I would have found that out. So the podcast is great if you ask the right questions to tap into other parts of their life that you can then add value to. I think that is how I've seen it done really, really well, So for me, from a partnership perspective, that's one thing. And then the second thing is having a follow-up system for that. So I've seen some clients, they're really smart. They'll bring on guests, but after they bring on the guests, they have a spreadsheet of all the people they've had on their show. I've even seen people create almost like a mastermind out of this, where if they go to sell a new offer, they go to that list of past guests that they've had on and ask them if they're open to doing JVs, if they're open to doing testing the product, maybe they're a good fit for whatever they're thinking of launching. And they use that list of people as just a massive resource for JVs, for potential sales, and other opportunities that may, come up. So I think it's asking the right questions, but then also just being able, how do you cultivate that relationship after the fact that they've been on your podcast, right? Which can happen in a lot of different ways.
Man, I'm smiling and laughing because I'm hoping that you think that guy is actually a smart person, because that's exactly what I'm planning on doing. It's literally the question I had as things evolved with networking was, I only have a certain amount of time in the day to connect with people, and beyond going to a bunch of events, I'm like, how else could I leverage my time to access deeper networks and develop deeper relationships? And immediately, because I'm in podcast advertising a lot with what I do, I'm like, well, podcasts makes a lot of sense. It opens them up, gives me an opportunity to connect with them deeper. And then I've got so many follow-ups, and I can tap into multiple networks and more relationship depth rather than just, whatever happens at a business conference or whatever. So I've got a full follow-up system, including, and you've been dropping really great partnership connection bombs. One of the questions I'm going to ask you later is literally what's your number one PartnerUp profit connection move? Something unique. So I'm going to save that for later, but you just mentioned a bunch. I think that the reasons you get into podcasting, which leads me into my next question, have to be really authentic and genuine to who you are and what you want to do. Because I think if you're trying to do this in a contrived way, it's such a saturated market. And I'm passionate about doing this right now. I'm passionate about talking marketing, partnerships, and leveling people up that are just starting their careers. That's really what I love to do. So emotionally, it's a good release for me to get on and do these conversations with people. So if anything, if I'm just talking to myself here, it's totally worth it for me, and I get to connect with somebody, that's even better. But who are the people that you see that maybe don't even have a podcast? You're you should totally get into podcasting, and they probably shake it off no, it's not for me. I'm not a podcaster. But have there been anyone you've identified, or are there people out there that you could run through a bit of a checklist to say, yeah, you'd probably be good to actually go at this? And who would that be?
Specific profiles, I would say people who are great at who have the ability to connect other people. If you talk to somebody at a conference, this is how I can tell someone's a connector. If you're talking to somebody at a mastermind or conference or whatever, and they mid-conversation will say, I have someone I need to introduce you to. Generally, they're probably going to be a good podcaster, because it's going to, first of all, they like connecting people, which happens a lot organically after you get on podcasts. Typically after an interview, I'll get 3 or 4 introductions to other people that I should know that I don't know, which can turn into a lot of different things. So for me, if you are somebody who, if you're talking to someone and they mention a problem they have, and you're able to automatically identify somebody in your life that could help them, a podcast would probably make sense for you. An interview podcast, because you're going to build that network and you'll be able to help more people. And if you're like me, that it creates a dopamine hit. I love connecting people. I like seeing people's problems get solved just by not the how, but the who. So that's a big piece right there. Does your brain kind of just fire up or light up when you hear somewhere you can make an introduction? The second one are people who are great at telling stories and being the life of the party. So I have a buddy of mine, you may know him, Adam Lyons. The first time I met this guy, if you know Adam, he is great at telling stories. And it's almost to the point where if you don't know him, it's kind of annoying, because he's captivating the entire room. And if you want to have a conversation with somebody, you can't, because everybody is paying attention to what Adam's saying. And I'm the first time I met him, I'm like, damn, this guy's good. But he's kind of annoying because he's too good. But if you're great at telling stories, if you like telling stories, if that lights you up inside, that's a really good platform for you, because obviously that content can be used for other things. And I find that some people aren't really that good at, if you tell them to sit in front of a camera and tell a story, they can't do it. But if you get them in maybe an interview setting, you can have a really good editor on the back end, clip that out and turn that into some kind of reel or short. And it'd be easier for you to extract ideas from your brain and knowledge from your brain in an interview setting or a podcast setting versus having a camera set up in front of you and saying, hey, give me 20 reels, and that way we can post them. So I think those are two main traits I would say people who are good. And then just people who get lit up by conversations like this, like connections, right? I'm sure for some people this is draining, right? I've definitely had those people and I'm like, why? You don't need a podcast. You need to write blogs.
Yeah.
But those are probably the big three. Yeah. Lit up by conversation, love connecting people, and love telling stories.
Yeah, and I think anybody in like a partnership marketing related role, whether it's, an affiliate marketing manager, an influencer manager, I think that all those roles could lead to something. And I've seen a lot of like my friends develop, like whether it's through ClickBank, I've seen some of those guys have opened their own podcasts, and it's all to build bigger businesses while also just maintaining like this passion for wanting to get a message out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about starting a podcast from scratch. If you were to do this, in the next 30 days, knowing what you know now, what would you recommend people start doing right away? And how do they get this off the ground within like 30, 60 days? And can it get off the ground in 30, 60 days?
Yeah. That's a great question. Where would I begin? We had this question at my event a couple months ago, and it was a great question. What I would first do is reverse engineer. What do I want out of the podcast? Is it connections and partnerships? Is it sponsorships? Is it I want to sell high ticket clients? Because for me, there's a very specific playbook and route for each of those three individual goals. So let's just say it's like the playbook, it's like the partnership, and I want to build my Rolodex. So when I have an offer to promote or when we're launching something new, I have a bunch of potential partners who would be open to maybe testing the offer for me or doing a list, doing some kind of like list rental or something. So that's the first thing. Identify like what's the goal. If it's kind of like the route of like I want to build a giant Rolodex of JVs or an army of JVs, I would incentivize every podcast host guest with like kind of like a competition. So almost like a JV, like an affiliate launch. Like we're going to give a prize to the person whose podcast has the most downloads. I'd interview like 50 people and say, look, we're dropping all 50 kind of like, day one, or not day one, probably like day by day. And the person who has the most downloads on their podcast is going to get a prize. Maybe it's $1,000. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's $500. Maybe it's like, I'll promote your offer, just out of like, for free, no affiliate link, no nothing, as a thank you for growing my podcast. That way I could get a lot of people excited about being on the show because there's a little bit of competition in it. I would do a really good job of making sure that we highlight what they're excellent at and just make sure that their episode comes out really clean looking. Nobody's going to promote anything if it doesn't look good or if it doesn't like make them look good. So edifying the guests is super important. But that would be my JV, like my playbook for like if I was launching a podcast again. The title, if we're talking like kind of specifics, the title, I would just make it very benefit rich, like probably something super simple. Like the name of my show is like how to get your first 100,000 listeners. It's very clear like who I'm trying to attract there. So don't get sexy or cute with the name. I think clarity trumps conviction. So just be very clear and straight to the point with your name. Like PartnerUp Profits, very simple. I know who you're talking to. Use Captivate for your software. Get a $100 mic and maybe some sound panels on the walls, which will run you no more than like maybe $200 altogether, and you should be ready to go. And then the only other thing from a marketing standpoint, I would ask all of those listeners, they're already incentivized to kind of like promote the episode because there's maybe a cash prize or something really big at the end. But I would give them like a pre-written email for our interview, and you can use softwares like CapShow, or you can use softwares like Melville to pre-write those emails if you don't want to, and get a rough draft. It's AI, so it's going to give you get you 50, 60% of the way there. So give them the swipe copy, give them, the episode like reel. That way they're already incentivized and ready to go when it comes to promoting.
No, I like the playbook ideas. And you're kind of opening my mind to some ideas, and maybe we'll go over them in my own ranking. But I love the idea of contests. Contests always gets, if you incentivize anybody and then you make them compete, even if they don't care about the $1,000, it's almost like I want to beat that other guy, or like, if they see a leaderboard, especially, like that's huge. Just on the side note, and I should have done my research on this, but like, do you have that step-by-step system as part of any program you've got? So like, I was looking for something like that when I was launching and ended up building my own. But if you don't, I think it's definitely a monetization opportunity for you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So we have a giveaway system where yeah, a lot of times that's with like creators or people have a supplement offer or an ebook product or something like an info product, where we'll help them kind of package like a bundle, so to
Right.
speak, of their suite of their software, their products, and give it away to 3 listeners. We haven't done that on the guest side, but I think I've seen guest competition. I think we've got one client right now. They have it's like a software development company. So they've built like an actual dashboard that feeds in the downloads of everyone's episode. So they can see it like real time, whose episodes are getting the most downloads. And it's great for like, they send the guests there. So you can get really robust with it.
Okay.
If you've got the team background or technical background, you can do some cool stuff. But going back to that strategy, yeah, you can incentivize. And I don't have a playbook for the guests, incentivizing guests to promote, but I should. But I think cash is probably the best and easiest route to go if you were going to think about a prize or promoting their offer for free, depending on who your guests are.
Right. If they value that, then that's a good exchange. I
Exactly.
think one thing too that I learned, and I've learned very, very expensive, important lessons in life, whether it was from joining a mastermind that led to me not pursuing a career in something. Like I joined a $10,000 mastermind back in 2010, and I learned that I didn't want to do that. Totally worth the money. You know what I mean? Like I ended up coming out of that and finding a new pivot in my trajectory of life. And then just recently I invested in their brand builders group. They're actually a great group. I just don't want to like endorse something, but there's a bunch of them out there. But I would say the one thing I learned from that, and it was another, I think, 15K investment. There was one question. It's like, who are you serving? And who I thought I was serving 12 months ago when I first started the program and the course completely changed within 12 months. I thought I was going to serve this personal development crowd, people that wanted to put themselves first. And that's still in the back of my mind, but it wasn't necessarily who I was and what I was able to offer in value. So I would say that out of all those lessons I learned of investing a lot of money, the number one thing to do is just be honest with yourself as to who you're trying to serve and not who you'd like to serve. And you'd like to become the next Rogan or something. That might not be you. Don't copy best practices because it's not the best practice. It's the individual. It's actually the attraction. Similar to songwriting. I did a lot of songwriting and ended up like I would tune out all stuff I would hear on the radio anymore because I just wanted to be myself. And when the podcast stuff came out, I actually didn't listen to a bunch of podcasts. I was the opposite. I didn't know a podcast really existed till 2017, 2018. We were talking about that on your podcast. I was completely like introvert, I had no idea what was happening. But through that, I was able to kind of develop a really personalized approach, hopefully. But yeah, my mind's like exploding with questions and I really want to get the essence of what could help somebody get to the next step in this. So let's unpack the 30 to 60 day journey a little bit more. I want to understand, because I know what I'm doing. I'm doing full, I'm going to do video content creation. I've got a team. I've got systems because I'm good at that. Now, I know you can hire people to do that, but what's like the bare minimum someone needs to get a podcast out the door, And I know for yourself, you've got your own preferences too.
Yeah. I think in today's world, I do think you need to do video. And that doesn't mean you need to do like full 3-camera set, lots of cuts, you don't need to do crazy video, but you do need to do is clean video. So for me, at the basic, it's having a Riverside or a Zoom account where you can do video content. And because nowadays, if you look at the stats, YouTube is the biggest platform for podcasts, not Apple, not Spotify. They have more monthly listeners than Spotify and Apple, which is crazy. But that tells you that video podcasts are now like a prerequisite. I got an email, one of my team members on Slack, they posted today that TikTok is going to now start, supporting full length podcasts as well. So you can tell, and I'm assuming it's going to be video podcasts. That's my assumption. So, you can tell that it's going the route of video podcasts, and there's just so much more you can do. So all that to say, video podcasts, you can use I'm using a Logitech 1080p mic or 1080p camera. And literally $100 mic, and my background cost me probably like $250 all in. So it doesn't take a lot to make it look clean and simple. And for me, that would be the basics of what you need: mic, camera, do video content, and then obviously what I've done is like one way to improve my videos every single time is after I record a video, I will just sit and listen to it, and I will just add timestamps for my team as to where I want them to insert like B-roll, or insert a logo of like Airbnb because I mentioned it, or insert some words on the screen. And I also just study other people, other creators like the Alex Hormozis of the world, and just see what they're doing. It's not the most like time effective, but it helps me improve as a creator, right? If I want to be competitive in my space.
I was gonna say, like, I've got a team helping me, and they're great. And the time stamping, I leave it up to them. But I'm thinking, especially in the initial stages, I might have to take on a bit more of the marketing components, because that's also what I am good at. I'm good at recognizing that. It sounds like that's one of your superpowers too. So I'm taking notes on this podcast as we go as well, mentally.
Yeah.
Let's say we've got a podcast going. It's going pretty well. I made the choice that I believe in myself, I believe in the mission, I believe in consistency, and I know that I just want to get ranked to start getting out there more. I decided to go with you guys. What does a roadmap look like? I mean, for the average person who's not going to get a ranking, agreement with you guys, they're not working with you. How much of a time saver is it versus doing it yourself?
For getting ranked?
Yeah, provided that because you're vetting people, you're looking for the top podcasts you think you can help, right? Which is really admirable in my opinion. So provided they're the right person to get them ranked, whether it's top 10, 50, or 100, versus them trying to do it themselves, like how many years are you saving or like shaving off maybe?
It's funny. So I don't think we're shaving off years. We just have the systems built now. Because the way the algorithm works, and this is probably the big soundbite we want to clip out for the front. The way the podcast or Apple Podcast algorithm works, that it looks at a 24 to 72 hour time range. So it's saying, how many subscribers has Joey gotten in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, and 72 hours? If that number is higher than, just for all intents and purposes, Joe Rogan, on that particular day, you will rank higher than Joe Rogan. Now, it factors in a couple other things too. It looks at like listen time. It looks at downloads. To a certain extent, I believe I've moved up in the rankings because I've had higher downloads, not necessarily subscribers. So I know it's playing a small factor. But the biggest needle mover we can move with our system, because we have access to over 1 million emails, is the fact that we can drive a crap ton of subscribers to people's podcasts, and other people just can't, because unless you get 1 million plus emails mailing your podcast, you can't do that. So that is like the time we're saving. There are other ways to do it. Like we talked about the giveaway contest. We used to use giveaways a lot to get people to subscribe. Again, it has to be within that short time frame. And if you want to stay on the ranking, you want to stay on the charts, you've got to keep driving traffic, because it's a moving 3-day average, right? So it's like, if you got a bunch of downloads and subscribers last Tuesday, you'll be up and then you'll be right back down. So the key is, how do we keep getting new blood? It's like a business that needs new sales every day. Like for some reason they have no retention, or like a company with no subscription model. It's like you got to keep pumping the sales, because these are one-time sales. I kind of think of like that's kind of how podcasts are, right? Like there's longevity, because a portion of those listeners will stick, but a large majority of them won't. They'll subscribe, listen 4 or 5 episodes, and then they bounce and forget about you. So you have to keep on driving new people to stay on top of the charts, to hitting that subscribe button, listening, and downloading. Listening long, like consumption rate, because Apple is actually looking at that and looking at, well, how long are these people staying on the episode? So in terms of time, like we're definitely saving them time, because building up the subscriber base is not easy. And also just like finding that many emails to mail for you is definitely difficult. So that's for us kind of where we've kind of figured out how we can serve and help people the most.
Got it. So you're looking for people who've got some sort of established idea / podcast existing that are looking to amplify and put kind of fuel in the fire, right? Like that's really what you guys specialize in. It's not really the starting the podcast thing.
Yeah, I mean, we start podcasts all the time. We do the strategy and positioning. Where I get jazzed up though is really around like somebody who's got a established idea or brand, and they want to rank it. And the thing we didn't talk about just now was like, what happens? What should you do with your ranking? Which is really where I think the magic is. So getting ranked is one thing and staying there, but the next thing is like, well, how do we use it to create a flywheel and create more momentum? And that comes in leveraging the ranking to, number one, get on other podcasts. Because if you have a top number 6 show in marketing, guess what? You can go and hit up all the other people in the marketing who have these rankings and all these established listener bases. You can now hit them up and with a higher possibility of success, get on their podcast.
Right.
So that's one key thing. The second thing is who can I bring on that's massive that I want to do a JV or some kind of affiliate deal with or some kind of promotion with on my podcast that is now top 10, which is a lot more credible than it is if it's just a podcast. How do I leverage that new third-party validation to get those people on my get people on my show and build a relationship? And then can I use it to get clients or sponsors? So those are, after the ranking happens, it's like, okay, how do we actually drop the hammer and really push the outreach to opening more doors for us, right? That's really where I like to work with people, and the right people, right? Like people who have ethical products that we can support and we like, that are in alignment with what we believe in. So yeah, that's kind of the next part, which I probably jumped the gun on that a little bit.
No,
but,
I'm glad you brought it up, because monetization is the key. And I had considered it, but I was like, now that you open my eyes to that, I'm like, yeah, that totally makes sense. That it's like the door opener, right? It's a foot in the door. It's getting the email answered because you have this, credit to your name now, as opposed to just being a nobody in the wind a little bit. But I live and breathe podcast advertising. That's what I do with the teams that I run. So I'm totally aware of that, but it's also an advanced strategy. So I like the idea of building up the foundation with going on other interviews, building a list too. Like, what do you have to offer as an ethical bribe for people to go back and start monetizing that list later through email marketing, which is another one of our fortes from back in the day. I think people aren't necessarily, I don't know, to me, sometimes I feel people are missing the part of the bribe or their own internal acquisition system of their own clients. Like, to your point, maybe you could use it as a client acquisition system as opposed to promoting other people's products all the time or looking for advertising.
Totally. Yeah, that could be a whole other option or avenue for that. Talking about, so that totally makes sense.
Is podcasting going to stick around, or are we at the peak of it now?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think it'll transform and morph itself into something else. I don't think it'll ever be totally gone, but I think it'll change and shift as we've seen social media change and shift. I do believe that the long form people trying to model or copycat like the Tim Ferrisses and the Joe Rogans of the world, those are dead. Like, trying to model those at a mediocre level just doesn't make sense. So I do think you have to be more niche, which is odd because social media nowadays, it's I see a lot of people posting or talking about the anti-niche strategy, where I think in podcasting, it's that's a death sentence if you try to do that in podcasting, where you try to be all things to all people, you're just not going to really get any traction because nobody knows what you're going to show up and deliver. And I don't think it'll die. I think a lot of podcasting will transition from being audio only, where I think some people want to stay and live, to being 100% video first. So I'm telling all of our clients and telling all of our people, double down on YouTube, because YouTube is the future. They hired a CMO, they hired a head of podcasting, a C-suite executive for just the podcasting division in 2021. And they've built in around a couple months from what I read earlier this year, they are going to be rolling out podcasts on YouTube Music. So actual audio podcasts on YouTube Music. So that is the place to be. I believe that podcasts will be more so a YouTube thing in a couple of years because they're already owning the market.
I'm not surprised. YouTube has been growing as a partnership channel for many of my clients. It's evergreen, it's baked in advertising, and it's visually appealing, and it's edutainment. It's all rolled into one versus just a podcast where it's maybe just audio. And everything can be successful on its own, but I do see YouTube as being the number one platform, and I've talked to a couple other people who have said the same thing. So if someone's got a podcast and are looking to work with you and to get ranked and to fast track this whole process and get your vault. Your vault is amazing, by the way. I love the systems you have. I'm a systems guy, so I'm a fan of everything system related. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you and start to see if it's for them?
Best place would be just to go to top10podcasts with an s.com. Should type that in, and yeah, that'll come up in all the website. Have all the details you need, and just hit book a call, and I'll be there.
Awesome, man. Well, that concludes the business formal part of this podcast. Now we're going to go in the connection strategies and the personal side. And my favorite part of the podcast, because if I were to have the Joey V show, this is where it would start right now, is like getting to know Luis a little bit deeper. So the first thing I want to ask, which is, again, if you're on this initial release of the podcast, which you are, you're going to be included in the 101 ways to, partner up and profit, in a more sustainable way. So partner up profit question for you. What's been something that somebody's used on you or you've used on them in an ethical way to get your email answered, to get your foot in the door, to make that connection strategy strong so you actually get a response?
Oh, this is a good one. So this is a guy too. So Vince Del Monte, love Vince. He sent me once in the mail $1. like just $1, and it said it was attached with like a little note that's like, giving this to you, like your first dollar maybe like towards like the mastermind or coming to the event or something. But it's like, if you ever want to like get people to respond to you, send them money, which is crazy. I know it's expensive, but if you have 150, think about it, you got 150 people you want to reach out to, send them $1. Yeah, it's $150 plus shipping, and like it's not that bad. And it's just, it gets your eyes, like even if it's just $1, like it's funny because it just made you think of it. I've never forgot it. This was like maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And that was a really funny one. Like, I don't expect to get money in the mail from mentors, friends. But that was a good one. I think that's probably the best. The second one was, if I can give you two, it was going back to earlier, my friend sending me a hat of the team I hate the most. So if you know the team they hate the most or love the most, either one, it's fun to just send them the hat of it. I find it fun to send them the competitors because they're just like, oh, this guy knows me, like, so if I don't know what, like, Toronto Maple Leafs biggest competitor is, but think about who would you send that hat to?
I love that you send the Nemesis hat and not like the fan hat.
Yeah. Exactly.
And you're like, that really does mean this person, because everyone can know their favorite team, but who knows the actual hateful team or whatever. Oh, right. That's great, man. I'm gonna swipe both of those in the Partner Up Profits Power Move book. Thank you for those.
You're welcome.
Next section. We've got 10 questions. They're quick fire questions. I've got a timer on for 2 minutes. I'm going to start it. First thing that comes to mind, and just blurt it out, and we keep moving on, and it's going to be fun, man. All right. Do it. Favorite food?
Pizza.
Your best memory?
England.
Ooh. If you had another go around and you got to write a new story for your life, what would it be in 30 seconds or less?
Oh, email marketer, philanthropist. That's it.
I love it. You're concise and on time here. What's the best productivity hack you've implemented in your business or personal life?
Timers, Pomodoro technique.
It's a trick question. If, nobody wants to retire, but do you want to retire? Yes or no? And if not, what are you doing more of in your days?
No, and just serving people in the community.
Love it. What book changed your life?
4-Hour Work Week.
What do you want to be remembered for?
Being a really good supporter and friend, even when I didn't have to be.
I like that. I resonate with that one. What's one skill, I know you got some nieces and nephews there. What's one skill you'd recommend them developing as early as possible just to be more happy, successful in life that you wish you would have taken on early in life?
Sales.
Oh, I haven't heard that one in a while, so that's a good one. All right. We're meeting back up in a year from today. We're getting together somewhere at an event. What are we celebrating?
Ranking your podcast number 1 in marketing.
Right answer. And what's one bucket list item? And again, I'd be happy to get together with you on this, but what are you doing? Or what's a new chapter in your life that you want to write that you haven't written yet?
Building a massive health and finance network in podcasting.
That's another celebration right there. And I know you'll do it. So last question, billboard question. Okay. If you had one clear and articulated message to everyone listening regarding business, in general that you'd put up as a billboard or personal message? What is it?
I think nowadays it's around having, and it sounds like Gary Vee for a second, but it's having more empathy and compassion for the other person, and just not snapping or just seeing it from your side of the story. So compassion, empathy for team, clients, people on the street, people homeless. I think those are the big ones for me.
Having compassion, like that. Powerful shares, great value adds throughout this whole episode. And for everyone who wants to work with Luis, top10podcast.com. Find him on social. Everyone can find everyone these days, especially if you're a partnership marketing expert. I would hope so. Yeah. Luis, it's been a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to working with you and future projects together. And happy to have you on the show. Thank you.
Dude, thanks so much again, Joey.
All right, guys, we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.